It starts with a look, a magnetic smile, the sense that finally you've found someone who truly sees you. What follows feels like a dream until it becomes a nightmare. This is not just a story about heartbreak. It's a descent into psychological warfare where love is weaponized, reality is twisted, and your sense of self begins to vanish without a trace. In this documentary, we step inside the hidden world of narcissistic abuse, a world where manipulation masquerades as affection and control hides behind charm. Through personal testimony, psychological insight, and a raw search for truth, we ask the haunting question, was it just a toxic relationship? Or something far more sinister? Was my narcissist ex the devil in disguise? They never walk in with horns. In fact, the beginning is disarming. It often feels magical, like fate has finally delivered the one person who understands you on a soul, deep level. The narcissist doesn't just listen, they mirror. Your dreams, your values, your vulnerabilities, everything is reflected back to you with uncanny precision. It's seductive, not in a superficial sense, but in a way that makes you feel deeply seen and effortlessly understood. That's not accidental, it's by design. Narcissistic abuse rarely starts with obvious control or cruelty. It begins with adoration. You're put on a pedestal so high it feels like a once-in-a-lifetime love story. They study you, learn your rhythms, and echo your language. You begin to trust, to open up, to feel safe in a connection that seems to defy logic. This is the charm phase, the mask they wear so convincingly that even the most intuitive person can fall under their spell. And once you're emotionally invested, that's when the mask starts to slip. But it doesn't fall off all at once. It cracks slowly, subtly. It might begin with a joke that cuts a little too deep, a strange reaction to a harmless question, an argument that leaves you feeling guilty even when you did nothing wrong. You brush it off. Everyone has flaws. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe you're being too sensitive. That's part of the manipulation. Doubt becomes your constant companion. Charm becomes the weapon because it keeps you questioning what's real. Each time they do something that feels off, they follow it with gestures of affection, a heartfelt apology, a night out, a grand declaration of love. The brain starts to confuse inconsistency with passion, chaos with depth. This backhand forth keeps you tethered, desperate to get back to that intoxicating high from the beginning. What most people don't realize is that narcissists aren't just confident people who love attention. Narcissistic abuse is a calculated cycle, idealization, devaluation, and discard, and in many cases they repeat this cycle over and over, even within the same relationship. But during that initial stage, when they're showering you with affection and admiration, the illusion of perfection is so strong that it becomes your emotional baseline. You keep chasing that version of them, the one they only showed you when they wanted you hooked. Behind closed doors, things start to shift. They may become more critical, passive, aggressive, or withdrawn. You start working harder to please them, to avoid their mood swings, to earn their love back. But you don't even realize that you're no longer in a relationship. You're in a psychological game, one you didn't agree to play. The charm isn't gone. It's now a tool used to reset the board every time you get close to walking away. If you threaten to leave or express hurt, they'll bring back the sweetness, the flowers, the long talks, the version of themselves that once felt like home. This is not reconciliation, it's reinforcement. They're training you to doubt your instincts, to override your discomfort, to stay loyal to a person who only shows up when control is at risk. Socially, they remain magnetic. Friends, co-workers, even family members often see them as charming and generous. That contrast can make you feel isolated, even ashamed. You wonder why you're the only one experiencing the darker side. You start to question if maybe it really is you. That's part of the genius of the mask. It's not just for you, it's for everyone around you. They build a reputation of being the good guy, the supportive partner, the charismatic leader, and when you finally reach a breaking point, others might not believe your story. Worse, they might defend the very person who made your world feel like a minefield. There's a specific kind of pain in knowing that the person who once held your hand like it was the most sacred thing in the world is the same person who now uses your insecurities against you. The same voice that once soothed you now leaves you doubting your worth. They weaponize your love, your empathy, your loyalty. Every sincere emotion you offered becomes a tool for control, and still you might stay, not because you're weak, but because the charm was real. At least it felt real. It was immersive, addictive, and you spend months, even years, hoping it will come back. That if you just communicate better or stop overreacting or become the version of yourself they once adored, the magic will return. What you don't realize is that the magic was a performance tailored to disarm you. It was never about love. It was about control. As you begin to wake up to this reality, the psychological toll becomes clear. You find yourself walking on eggshells, silencing your needs, policing your emotions so you don't trigger their rage or withdrawal. You start shrinking, dimming your light, abandoning pieces of yourself just to keep the peace. The person you were, the confident, curious, joyful version, becomes harder to recognize. This is the real cost of narcissistic abuse, not just the lies or the betrayal, but the erosion of identity. It's the way your mind is hijacked, your truth distorted, your world narrowed to revolve around someone who only values you when you serve their image. By the time you consider leaving, you're often a shadow of who you were. Friends have drifted, your self-esteem is in tatters, you've spent so long surviving that the idea of starting over feels terrifying, but something inside you, may be just a whisper at first, starts to say no more. That whisper grows louder every time the mask slips and the truth shows itself. There are no visible scars, no public scenes, just a slow, silent unraveling behind closed doors, and even once you're out, it takes time to see it clearly. To name what happened, to forgive yourself for not seeing through the charm, because it wasn't your fault. It was never about you being naive or needy. It was about someone weaponizing charm with surgical precision, and hiding behind a mask they never intended to take off. Reality isn't always what it seems, especially when you're living inside someone else's version of it. Gaslighting doesn't begin with an explosion. It begins with whispers, subtle distortions of truth, little rewrites of what you just saw, what you just felt. It starts when you begin to second, guess your memory, your instincts, your sanity. When you're in a relationship with a narcissist, reality itself becomes a battleground, and the truth is the first casualty. At first, it might seem harmless. You mishear something, and they correct you. You bring up a concern, and they insist you're misunderstanding. These moments seem isolated. You chalk them up to normal communication issues, maybe even admire how confident they are in their version of events. But slowly, those corrections become contradictions. Your words are twisted. Your feelings are invalidated. You start to feel like no matter how clearly you remember something, they remember it differently, and their version always paints them as the reasonable one, and you as unstable, over-emotional, or even manipulative. This is gaslighting, and it's one of the most insidious tools in the narcissist's arsenal. What makes it so dangerous is how invisible it can be. Gaslighting doesn't rely on brute force or screaming matches. It relies on confusion. It works best in the quiet moments, during an argument that ends in you apologizing even though you're the one who was hurt, or when you confront a betrayal and somehow leave the conversation feeling guilty for even bringing it up. Over time, this drip, feed of doubt erodes your ability to trust yourself. You stop speaking up because you don't want to be dramatic. You begin censoring your reactions double, checking your perceptions, keeping your emotions tucked away so you won't be accused of being too sensitive. You lose your internal compass. You might still look like yourself on the outside, but inside you're lost in a fog of self-doubt, and this fog doesn't clear easily. Living in a gaslit reality is like standing in a house with mirrors on every wall, but all of them are warped. You think you see yourself, but nothing looks right. You try to step back into clarity, but the walls close in. You become disoriented, unsure where the walls end and where you begin. That's what psychological manipulation does. It doesn't just control your choices, it dismantles your ability to believe in your own version of reality. The narcissist thrives in this environment. It's not just about winning arguments, it's about control. If they can control the narrative, they control the relationship. If they can make you question your memory, your feelings, your perceptions, they can justify anything. Affairs, lies, emotional withdrawal, cruelty, all of it becomes excusable because somehow it's always your fault. You misunderstood, you misremembered, you overreacted, and if they're especially skilled, they won't just gaslight you about the bad things, they'll gaslight you about the good too. They'll make you believe you've never been happier, never been more loved, more cherished. They'll say you're lucky to be with someone who puts up with you. They'll remind you of all the ways they've helped you, all the sacrifices they've made, all the times they forgave you when you were acting crazy. This distortion of kindness is part of the trap. It keeps you tethered, keeps you doubting whether the abuse is even real. Because the truth is, most victims of gaslighting don't leave when they're first hurt. They leave when they finally recognize that the ground beneath them isn't stable, that the version of life they've been living isn't real, and that realization doesn't come quickly. It comes in flashes, in stolen moments of clarity. Maybe it's during a conversation with a friend, or a journal entry, or a random post that hits a little too hard. Something breaks through the fog, and suddenly you start to wonder, what if it wasn't me? But the kingdom you've been living in doesn't give up its hold easily. Doubt creeps back in. You think of the good times, the apologies, the tears they shed when they said they couldn't live without you. You remember how convincing they were, how much you wanted to believe them. Gaslighting doesn't just distort reality. It builds emotional dependency. It teaches you to distrust yourself so much that even when the truth is staring you in the face, you flinch. The aftermath of gaslighting isn't just confusion, it's grief. You're not just mourning a relationship. You're mourning the version of yourself that was silenced, dismissed, made to feel like she was always wrong. You're mourning the clarity that was stolen from you, the instincts you were taught to suppress, and recovery isn't linear. There will be days when the truth feels solid and days when it slips away again. This is what makes gaslighting so hard to explain to those who haven't experienced it. It's not about one fight or one lie, it's about an entire psychological environment where reality becomes subjective, where perception is weaponized, where self-trust is systematically dismantled. And on the outside, everything can look so normal, even perfect. The narcissist's public persona often remains intact, admired even. Meanwhile, you're the one left unraveling. You might find yourself obsessing over the past, replaying conversations, digging through old messages to prove to yourself that what happened was real. That's not weakness, that's your mind trying to reclaim itself. Trying to rebuild a sense of truth after it's been shattered. You may feel angry, ashamed, even afraid. All of that is valid, because escaping a gaslit relationship isn't just leaving a person. It's leaving a version of reality that felt real for a long, long time. And once you step out, the silence is deafening. You begin to realize how much energy you spent trying to defend your truth, How much of your life revolved around anticipating their moods, managing their reactions, translating their lies into something livable? You see how small your world became, how much of yourself you gave up just to survive in a reality that was never truly yours. There is power in seeing it for what it was, in naming the manipulation, in saying out loud that what you experienced wasn't confusion, it was gaslighting, and the fact that you're beginning to recognize it means the fog is lifting, slowly, painfully, but surely. You begin to look back on moments that once felt blurry and start to see them with sharper eyes. You hear your own voice returning, tentative but stronger with each breath. It's strange how the most dangerous moments in life don't always arrive with alarms blazing or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes they slip through in silence, camouflaged as compromise, disguised as love. Looking back, the red flags were never hidden, they were always there, but I didn't see them for what they were, or maybe I did, and chose not to look too closely. When you're in it, especially in the early stages, you don't call them red flags. You call them quirks, misunderstandings, emotional baggage. You tell yourself that everyone comes with some damage, and you convince yourself that love means patience, that growth requires discomfort. What you don't realize, at least not yet, is that what you're calling compromise is actually the slow surrender of your boundaries. There's that moment when they interrupt you mid-sentence and brush off what you were trying to say. It feels small, maybe they were just excited, maybe they didn't mean it. Then there's the time they make a passive-aggressive comment about how you dress or who you're texting. You laugh it off, make a joke, tell yourself they're just being protective. You call it passion, but something inside you pauses, just for a second. That pause is your intuition knocking, and every time you silence it, it gets quieter. The red flags were rarely loud. They were embedded in the little things. The way their apologies came with caveats. The way they turned every conflict into a lecture about your flaws. How they always seemed to be the victim, no matter what had actually happened. You start to notice a pattern. Whenever they hurt you, somehow you end up being the one who has to fix it. It's in the double standards. They can flirt, but you're disrespectful. If you mention someone from your past, they can ignore your texts for hours, but you better not take too long to respond. They can raise their voice, slam a door, storm out. But if you get emotional, you're crazy. The rules bend around them, and you're the one who has to stay flexible. Sometimes the red flags were wrapped in compliments. They said they couldn't live without you, that they'd never felt this way before. You were everything to them. It felt flattering at first, intoxicating even, but over time that intensity started to feel like pressure. You felt responsible for their happiness, their stability, their identity. You weren't a partner. You were a lifeline, and that's not romance. That's dependency. There were moments that didn't sit right, a weird story that didn't add up, an overreaction to a simple question, a strange reaction to your success, but you brushed it aside because they had a way of making you feel like doubting them was a betrayal, like your concern was the real problem. You learned to suppress the discomfort, to rationalize the contradictions. You kept choosing the story you wanted to believe over the reality your body was trying to show you. Red flags are rarely missed. They are dismissed. Dismissed because of hope, because of fear, because you've already invested so much. You've already defended them to your friends. You've already adapted to their moods, softened your edges, recalibrated your sense of normal. And by the time the deeper patterns start to emerge, manipulation, gaslighting, emotional withdrawal, you are already deep in the cycle. Now leaving doesn't feel like walking away from a bad situation. It feels like abandoning someone you promised to love, so you stay, and in staying, you become complicit in your own erasure. Not because you want to disappear, but because it feels easier than constantly fighting to be heard, to be seen, to be believed. You tell yourself it's not that bad, that things will get better. That if you can just love them harder, deeper, more perfectly, maybe the good version of them, the one from the beginning, will come back, but that version was never real. It was a mask, a projection of what they knew you needed. And the red flags you ignored weren't just personality flaws, they were warnings. They were the system glitches in an otherwise charming disguise. Every offhand insult, every manipulative apology, every moment they twisted the truth to make themselves the victim. Each one was a clue, and yet even now you hesitate to call it abuse, because they never hit you, because they said sorry, because they cried, because there were good days, maybe even great ones. That's how deep the conditioning runs. You've been taught to measure harm by how loud it is, but narcissistic abuse doesn't scream at whispers. It builds slowly, silently, behind closed doors, and by the time it becomes obvious, you're already questioning whether you're overreacting. When you finally start to see clearly, it's disorienting. You replay conversations. You catch yourself rewriting history to make them look better, to make yourself seem less foolish. You remember the moments when your gut told you something was wrong and how quickly you dismissed it. You feel anger not just at them, but at yourself for ignoring the signs, for making excuses, for staying. But this is the thing no one tells you. Red flags are easier to see in hindsight because survival instincts are powerful. When you're emotionally attached, your brain will do anything to preserve the connection. You minimize, you rationalize, you normalize. It's not weakness. It's human nature. You weren't blind. You were hopeful. And that hope became the leash they used to keep you close. Even now, in the quiet aftermath, you'll be tempted to doubt yourself, to remember only the good, to second guess the seriousness of what happened. That's part of the residue. You've been trained to distrust your own judgment, but the details don't lie. They never did. You just didn't want them to mean what they clearly did. The devil doesn't walk in with fire and fury. Sometimes he shows up with flowers, a smile, and just enough love to keep you from walking away. But in the end, the truth is always in the details. Those small, persistent moments where something didn't feel right, but you convinced yourself it was love. Freedom is not the final chapter. It's the first page of a story you never wanted to write. When you finally leave a narcissistic relationship, people expect you to feel relieved, empowered, triumphant. You escaped the chaos, you walked away, you're free now, and on some level that's true. You're no longer living in their world, under their rules, navigating their moods like landmines. You're no longer being manipulated, silenced, or drained every single day. But freedom isn't peace, not yet. Because the moment the door closes behind you, something unexpected happens. You feel empty, not because you miss the abuse. You don't miss the fear or the gaslighting or the emotional roller coasters. But you do miss the version of love you thought you had. You miss the illusion, the high of being idealized, the comfort of routine, even if that routine was dysfunction, the structure of surviving. And now, in the absence of all of it, you're left with a kind of silence that echoes in uncomfortable ways. It's in this silence that the real work begins. Healing after narcissistic abuse isn't just about recovery, it's about reconstruction. You're not just tending to wounds, you're trying to rebuild an entire sense of self that's been chipped away piece by piece. Because when you're with a narcissist, you learn to minimize who you are just to keep the peace. You become a smaller version of yourself, one that fits neatly inside their world. And when you finally break free, you don't know how to expand again. You've been living in survival mode for so long that safety feels unfamiliar. And then there's the shame. Shame is one of the hardest parts of the aftermath. It creeps in during the quiet moments, asking questions you don't want to answer. How did I let this happen? Why didn't I leave sooner? How did I not see the signs? It's a vicious loop. Because even though you know what happened to you was real and wrong, part of you still blames yourself for allowing it. That's the residue of the manipulation. Even when they're gone, their voice lingers in your mind. Second, guessing your truth. Healing means challenging that voice every single day. It means retraining your brain to believe your instincts again. To trust your own memory, your perception, your emotional responses. It means learning that boundaries aren't selfish, they're essential, that saying no doesn't make you difficult, that your needs are not too much. These are not easy lessons, especially when you've been conditioned to feel guilty for having any needs at all. You start to notice the trauma in strange places. You flinch when someone raises their voice. You panic when a text goes unanswered. You find yourself over-explaining, apologizing, overthinking simple interactions. You scan faces for signs of anger, brace for rejection when there's no threat in sight. This hypervigilance isn't you being dramatic, it's what your nervous system learned to do to survive, and now, even in freedom, it doesn't know how to stop. Relationships become complicated, even friendships. You struggle to trust, not because you expect everyone to hurt you, but because you're terrified of missing the signs again. You're scared of choosing wrong. You don't want to lose yourself like that again. So you pull back, you isolate, you protect yourself from the very intimacy you crave, and it feels lonely, but it also feels safer than being vulnerable. Freedom also brings grief. Grief for the years you lost, for the version of yourself that was stifled, for the dreams that faded quietly while you were busy trying to fix someone who never wanted to be fixed. There's no ceremony for this kind of grief, no words that make it easier. It just lives in your chest for a while, heavy and unspoken. You carry it into your new life, even as you try to move forward. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, something shifts. You catch yourself laughing, really laughing, without fear of how it will be perceived. You find joy in something small, and you don't immediately wonder if it will be taken from you. You start saying no to things that drain you. You stop over-explaining. You rest without guilt. These are the quiet victories that mark the real healing. Not the big milestones, but the daily moments where you choose yourself. You begin to notice how your body responds differently to peace. At first, it feels boring, even unsettling, but then you start to crave it. You find comfort in calm conversations. You feel safe in the presence of people who don't demand parts of you in exchange for affection. You start to define love differently, not as intensity or obsession or sacrifice, but as consistency, care, and mutual respect. But healing isn't linear. There are setbacks. Some days you'll feel strong and sure. Other days, one memory or song or scent can knock the wind out of you. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're still unlearning, still rewiring, still making your way out of the mental and emotional architecture they built around you. There's no perfect timeline, no checklist. Some scars stay with you, not as signs of failure, but as evidence of what you survived. And survival in itself is a kind of power, because they tried to convince you that you couldn't live without them, that you'd fall apart without their validation, but here you are, breathing, waking up. Moving forward, even if some days all you do is keep breathing, the healing isn't loud, it doesn't come with applause, it happens quietly. When you set a boundary, when you trust your gut, when you choose rest over self, sacrifice, when you stop apologizing for taking up space, when you look in the mirror and see someone you're finally starting to recognize, and maybe one day peace doesn't feel like a foreign land anymore, it feels like home. Not a home someone else built, but one you created for yourself, brick by brick, boundary by boundary, truth by truth. Healing from narcissistic abuse isn't a return to who you were. It's a rebirth into who you were always meant to be before someone tried to rewrite your story. You come out scarred, yes, but stronger, wiser, sharper. You've learned to hear the quiet warnings in your body. You've learned that love should never require your silence, your submission, or your self-sacrifice. And most of all, you've learned that walking away isn't weakness. It's the loudest declaration of self. worth you can ever make. The pain doesn't vanish. Some memories will always sting, but now they serve a different purpose. They no longer define you. They remind you of what you overcame, of what you'll never accept again, and of the voice you reclaimed after it was almost lost. So if you're still finding your way out of the fog, hold on. If you've made it out and wonder why peace still feels so unfamiliar, trust the process. You are not broken. You are healing, and every boundary you set, every truth you speak, every piece of yourself you choose to honor, that is freedom. Not the kind they gave you, but the kind you fought for. The kind no one will ever take from you again.